Did you know the king of rock and roll has songs almost nobody listens to? Ever wondered what hidden Elvis gems are collecting digital dust on streaming platforms? Number 10. Do the Clam. 1965. Have you ever heard of a song about a dance move inspired by a shellfish? That's exactly what Elvis delivered with Do the Clam, a tune so obscure that most streaming platforms barely register its plays. Released as part of the soundtrack for the film Girl Happy. In 1965, this beach party number instructed listeners on how to perform a quirky dance move that never quite caught on, like the twist or the mashed potato. The song features Elvis cheerfully explaining how to dig right in and do the clam, while backed by upbeat instrumentation typical of his movie soundtracks from that era. Despite being performed by the king himself, Do the Clam remains buried in the vast Elvis catalog, overshadowed by chart-topping hits. The track was written by Sid Wayne, Ben Wiesman, and Dolores Fuller specifically for the film, where Elvis performs it, surrounded by dancing beachgoers. Its playful lyrics and simple choreography were designed to capitalize on the beach movie craze of the 1960s. But the song never transcended its origins as movie filler. Music historians note that the period when Do the Clam was released represented a creative low point for Elvis, as his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, pushed him into a stream of formulaic movies with equally formulaic soundtracks. While films like Girl Happy performed adequately at the box office, the songs rarely match the quality or cultural impact of Elvis's earlier work or his later comeback material. Today's streaming audiences seem to agree, as they bypass Do the Clam in favor of Can't Help Falling in Love or Suspicious Minds. The song's obscurity is particularly interesting considering Elvis's legendary status and the thoroughness with which fans have combed through his catalog. Yet Do the Clam remains a curiosity, a glimpse into the commercialized movie soundtrack phase of Elvis's career that many prefer to forget. The dance itself, which involved extending arms and making clam-like motions, has become nothing more than a footnote in the history of 1960s dance crazes. Number 9. Song of the Shrimp. 1962. Ever imagined Elvis Presley singing a lullaby from the perspective of a shrimp? This bizarre nautical ballad from the soundtrack of Girls, Girls, Girls might be one of the strangest entries in the King's extensive catalog. Song of the Shrimp tells the melancholy tale of a mother shrimp warning her child about the dangers of human fishermen. Elvis delivers the song with surprising tenderness, crooning lyrics about the short, perilous life of crustaceans in a way that only he could somehow make palatable. The song emerged during Elvis's Hollywood period, when his musical output was largely dictated by the needs of movie scripts rather than artistic expression. Girls, Girls, Girls featured Elvis as a fishing boat captain in Hawaii, hence the maritime theme of many soundtrack selections. While the film performed well at the box office in 1962, the soundtrack songs, particularly this odd shrimp narrative, faded quickly from public consciousness. Composed by Sid Tepper and Roy C. Bennett, who wrote over 40 songs for Elvis throughout his career, Song of the Shrimp represents the kind of material that Colonel Parker and the Hollywood studio system pushed onto Elvis during his movie years. Critics have often pointed to songs like this as evidence of how Elvis's talent was misused during the 1960s, with his powerful voice wasted on novelty numbers rather than meaningful material. Streaming data reveals that modern listeners rarely seek out this oceanic oddity. while Elvis enthusiasts might give it an occasional spin for curiosity's sake. Casual fans stick to his chart toppers and more dignified ballads. Music historians suggest that the song's anthropomorphizing of seafood, combined with its saccharine melody, makes it feel dated and somewhat disconnected from the raw energy that made Elvis a cultural icon in the first place. The song's production is typical of early 1960s Elvis movie soundtracks, clean polished, and lacking the grit of his 1950s recordings or the grandeur of his 1970s arrangements. This star-nighted sound, coupled with the undeniably strange subject matter, has relegated Song of the Shrimp to the deepest depths of streaming platforms, where it remains as overlooked as the tiny crustacean it memorializes. Number 8. U.S. Mail, 1968. Would you believe Elvis recorded a song filled with postal puns? U.S. Mail plays on the double meaning of mail throughout its lyrics, creating an extended metaphor about a jealous lover warning off competitors through the lens of Postal Service terminology. Released in 1968 as a single that reached a modest £28 on the Billboard charts, the song has since slipped into relative obscurity, especially on streaming platforms where it's consistently outperformed by Elvis's more iconic tracks. Written by Jerry Reed, who also played guitar on the recording, U.S. Mail shanks a country-influenced Elvis during a transitional period in his career. The song appeared just months before his famous 1968 comeback special that would reinvigorate his image, positioning U.S. Mail as one of the last gasps of his pre-comeback era. Despite Reed's clever wordplay and Elvis's committed delivery, the song has failed to maintain cultural relevance in the streaming age. The recording session for U.S. Mail took place at RCA Studio B in Nashville on January 16, 1968. Elvis recorded the song alongside tracks like Stay Away and Too Much Monkey Business, but while those songs have maintained modest streaming numbers, U.S. Mail has lagged behind. The production features Reed's distinctive finger-picking guitar style, which gives the track a country authenticity that stands out in Elvis's catalog. The lyrics position Elvis as a warning giving U.S. Mail, who tells potential romantic rivals that his woman's address is the same as mine, and advises them to return to sender, cleverly referencing his earlier hit. Despite these interconnections with Elvis lore, the song hasn't resonated with digital-era listeners who gravitate toward his more straightforward rock and roll classics or his emotionally powerful ballads. Music critics have suggested that the novelty nature of U.S. Mail, with its reliance on a single extended pun, may have limited its staying power. While clever for a single listen, the song lacks the emotional depth or musical innovation that characterizes Elvis's most enduring work. The track remains primarily of interest to Elvis completists and scholars studying his output during the often overlooked period just before his career resurgence. Number 7. Old Macdonald, 1967. Did you know Elvis once recorded his own rock version of the children's classic Old Macdonald Had a Farm? This unlikely cover appeared in the soundtrack for his 1967 film Double Trouble, transforming the nursery rhyme into a rockabilly number that sounds exactly as incongruous as you might imagine. Despite the novelty value of hearing the king of rock and roll singing about farm animals, streaming audiences have largely chosen to ignore this curious musical experiment. The song was recorded at MGM Studios in Hollywood on June 28, 1966, as part of the soundtrack sessions for Double Trouble. Like many of Elvis's movie songs from this period, Old Macdonald was produced quickly and with minimal creative input from Elvis himself. The arrangement attempts to inject some rock and roll energy into the children's song, with electric guitars and drums backing Elvis as he runs through the familiar E-I-E-I-O chorus and verses about pigs, cows, and ducks. In the context of the film, the song appears during a sequence where Elvis's character performs at a nightclub. But even within the often silly premises of his movies, the inclusion of Old Macdonald struck many as particularly bizarre. Critics at the time noted the growing disconnect between the adult image of Elvis and the increasingly juvenile material he was being asked to perform in his films. This disconnect is likely a major reason why streaming audiences today skip over this track in favor of Elvis's more mature offerings. Music historians point to songs like Old Macdonald as prime examples of how Colonel Parker's management and the Hollywood studio system failed to utilize Elvis's talents appropriately during the mid-1960s. Instead of challenging Elvis artistically or allowing him to evolve with changing musical trends, they often reduced him to performing novelty songs that undermined his credibility as an artist. The result is tracks that feel more like curiosities than legitimate entries in the catalog of a ground-reigning musical icon. The arrangement of Old Macdonald itself isn't without some musical merit. The backing band performs with professional skill, and Elvis commits to the material as much as possible. However, no amount of rock and roll energy can overcome the fundamental awkwardness of hearing a grown man best known for his hip-swiveling sexuality singing about barnyard animals. This fundamental mismatch between artist and material has relegated Old Macdonald to the bottom tier of streaming plays in Elvis's vast catalog. Number 6. Yoga is as yoga does, 1967. Can you imagine Elvis singing about yoga? Before it became a mainstream fitness practice in America, Elvis recorded this oddity for his 1967 film Easy Come, Easy Go. Yoga is as yoga does stands as perhaps one of the strangest entries in Elvis's film soundtrack catalog, featuring the King alongside actress Elsa Lanchester, as they trade verses about yogi practices with a level of cultural understanding that can only be described as 1960s Hollywood superficial. Recorded at Radio Resorters in Hollywood on September 28, 1966, the song was written by Sid Tepper and Roy C. Bennett, who contributed numerous songs to Elvis's movie soundtracks. The track features lyrics about stretching and meditation delivered with an Orientalist flavor, typical of the era, all set to a light comedic arrangement. In the film, Elvis performs the song while attempting yoga positions alongside Lanchester's character, creating a scene that was played strictly for laughs rather than cultural appreciation. The song's streaming numbers reveal it to be among the least revisited tracks in Elvis's extensive digital catalog. Modern listeners, whether casual fans or dedicated Elvis enthusiasts, tend to skip this novelty number in favor of his rock classics, gospel recordings, or powerful ballads. The song's dated cultural references and comedy-focused approach have not aged well, particularly as yoga has evolved from an exotic curiosity in American culture to a widely practiced and respected tradition. Music critics and Elvis biographers often point to songs like Yoga is as Yoga Does as evidence of how far Elvis had strayed from his groundbreaking early career by the mid-1960s. The song represents the nadir of Elvis's movie soundtrack period, where his remarkable vocal talents were wasted on disposable novelty tunes designed to fill screen time rather than showcase his abilities. The disconnection between the rebellious rock icon of the 1950s and the performer of yoga is as yoga does could hardly be more striking. The production quality of the recording itself is competent, with professional studio musicians and adequate technical standards. However, no amount of production polish can compensate for the fundamental mismatch between Elvis's talents and the material. The song exists as a cultural time capsule, capturing both Hollywood's superficial approach to Eastern practices and the creative low point of Elvis's career before his famous 1968 comeback special. Number 5. Fort Lauderdale Chamber of Commerce, 1965. Have you ever heard Elvis promote a Florida city in song? Fort Lauderdale Chamber of Commerce from the film Girl Happy might sound like a paid advertisement, but it's actually a largely forgotten track from Elvis's movie years that streaming statistics show almost no one chooses to hear today. The song essentially functions as a musical travel brochure, extolling the virtues of Fort Lauderdale as a spring break destination with lyrics that highlight beaches, sunshine, and romantic opportunities. Recorded at Radio Resorters in Hollywood on June 15, 1964. The song was written by Roy C. Bennett and Sid Tepper specifically for the Girl Happy soundtrack. The film, which starred Elvis as a band leader hired to keep an eye on a college student during spring break, used various locations in Fort Lauderdale as backdrops, making this promotional-sounding tune a plot-relevant selection. Nevertheless, the naked commercialism of the lyrics, combined with the forgettable melody, has caused this track to sink to the bottom of Elvis's streaming statistics. In the context of the film, Elvis performs the song with his band while students dance and frolic around him on the beach. The upbeat, tempo, and vacationer-friendly lyrics were designed to capture the carefree spring break atmosphere that the movie aimed to portray. However, outside the film's context, the song lacks the emotional resonance or musical distinctiveness that characterizes Elvis's more enduring material. Music historians note that songs like Fort Lauderdale Chamber of Commerce represent the formulaic approach to Elvis's movie soundtracks during the mid-1960s. The songs were often written quickly with minimal artistic consideration, simply to fulfill the requirements of the film rather than to stand as worthwhile additions to Elvis's musical legacy. This prioritization of quantity over quality has resulted in many movie-era Elvis songs being effectively abandoned by streaming audiences who gravitate toward his more authentic works. The production of the song features the typical clean, polished sound of Elvis's movie recordings from this period, with professional backing musicians and conventional arrangements. While technically proficient, the recording lacks the raw energy of Elvis's early rock and roll work, or the emotional depth of his later ballads. The song serves as a reminder of how Elvis's remarkable talents were often squandered during his Hollywood years on material that failed to challenge him artistically or showcase his unique abilities as a vocalist and performer. Number 4. Queenie Waheens, Papaya, 1966. Ever wondered what Elvis singing about tropical fruit would sound like? Queenie Waheens' Papaya, from the soundtrack of Paradise, Hawaiian Style, provides that unusual answer, and streaming statistics suggest modern listeners aren't particularly interested in finding out. This Hawaiian-themed novelty song tells the story of a woman named Queenie who sells papayas, with Elvis delivering lyrics filled with forced rhymes and cultural stereotypes that feel painfully dated by today's standards. Recorded at Radio Resorters in Hollywood on July 26, 1965, the song was written by Bill Giant, Bernie, Baum, and Florence Kay as part of the soundtrack for Elvis's 17th film. Paradise, Hawaiian Style, featured Elvis as a helicopter pilot in Hawaii, providing the tropical setting for this and several other Hawaiian-influenced tracks. The song's arrangement includes steel guitars and island-inspired percussion to create an exoticized version of Hawaiian music filtered through Hollywood's limited understanding of the culture. In the film, Elvis performs the song during a luau scene, surrounded by dancers in traditionalized Hawaiian costumes. The performance exemplifies the surface-level cultural appropriation common in 1960s Hollywood productions where complex cultural traditions were reduced to colorful backdrops for mainstream entertainment. The lack of authenticity, combined with the song's deliberately silly lyrics about fruit, has rendered Queenie Waheens' Papaya and Beckett that few modern Elvis fans choose to revisit. Music critics have not been kind to this track over the years, frequently citing it as an example of how Elvis's movie soundtracks often prioritize novelty over quality. The forced rhyming of Papaya, with phrases like higher and fire desire, creates lyrics that feel contrived rather than creative. Even Elvis himself reportedly disliked many of his movie songs during this period, recognizing the artistic limitations they represented compared to his earlier breakthrough recordings. The production quality of Queenie Waheens' Papaya, like most Elvis recordings, maintains professional standards with clear vocals and competent instrumentation. However, the song's conceptual weaknesses overshadow its technical merits. While Elvis brings his characteristic vocal commitment to the material, even his considerable talents can't elevate a song so fundamentally limited by its novelty approach and cultural insensitivity. As streaming platforms provide listeners with instant access to Elvis's entire catalog, it's not surprising that this Hawaiian fruit vendor tribute remains among his least played tracks. Number 3. There's No Room to Rumba in a Sports Car. 1963. Can you picture Elvis complaining about the challenges of dancing in a compact vehicle? This bizarre concept forms the basis for There's No Room to Rumba in a Sports Car, a novelty track from the 1963 film Fun in Acapulco that streaming data shows almost nobody chooses to hear today. The song details the romantic frustrations of a couple who can't properly dance the rumba in their small car, a problem so specific and unusual that it's hard to imagine many listeners relating to it. Recorded at Radio Resorters in Hollywood on January 22, 1963, the song was written by Fred Wise and Randy Starr for the Fun in Acapulco soundtrack. The film starred Elvis as a former trapeze artist working in Mexico, with this particular song serving as light comedic relief rather than a pivotal musical moment. The arrangement features Latin-influenced percussion and guitar work meant to evoke the Mexican setting, though filtered through Hollywood's typically superficial approach to international musical traditions. In the movie, Elvis performs the song while driving a small sports car with his love interest, played by Ursula Andress. The visual gag of them being cramped in the vehicle complements the song's lyrical content, creating a moment that may have generated moderate laughs in theaters, but has failed to maintain any cultural relevance in subsequent decades. The track exemplifies the disposable nature of many Elvis movie songs, created to fill screen time rather than to stand as meaningful additions to his musical legacy. Music historians and critics have cited There's No Room to Rumba in a Sports Car as a prime example of how Elvis's considerable talents were wasted on trivial material during his Hollywood years. The song's premise is stretched thin even for its brief running time, and the Latin-influenced arrangement feels more like a caricature than a genuine engagement with the musical tradition it references. Even Elvis's vocal performance, while professionally delivered, lacks the passion and conviction found in his more personal recordings. The production quality maintains the professional standards typical of Elvis's RCA recordings with clear audio and competent session musicians. However, these technical merits can't overcome the fundamental weaknesses of the song's concept and execution. As streaming has democratized music listening, allowing fans to easily select from an artist's entire catalog rather than being limited to what radio stations or record labels promote, songs like this have naturally fallen to the bottom of Elvis's play counts, relegated to the status of curious footnotes in a legendary career. Number 2. Dominic, 1965. Did you know Elvis once sang a heartfelt ballad about a bull? Dominic. From the 1965 film Tickle Me, tells the surprisingly emotional story of a brave bull named Dominic, who refuses to fight in the bull ring. This unusual narrative song has been nearly forgotten in the streaming era, with play counts showing it to be among Elvis's least revisited recordings, despite its unique premise and the King's committed vocal performance. Recorded at Radio Recorders in Hollywood on October 19, 1964, Dominic was written by Sid Tepper and Roy C. Bennett, prolific contributors to Elvis's movie soundtracks. The song's arrangement features Spanish-influenced guitar work and dramatic orchestration meant to evoke the bullring setting, creating one of the more ambitious musical backdrops found in Elvis's mid-1960s movie songs. Despite these production efforts, the song's unusual subject matter has relegated it to obscurity in the digital streaming landscape. In Tickle Me, the song appears during a dream sequence where Elvis's character imagines himself as a matador facing the reluctant bull Dominic. The film itself was unusual in Elvis's filmography for not featuring any originally recorded songs. All tracks, including Dominic, were pulled from previously released material. This recycling of songs reflected both budgetary constraints and the increasingly formulaic approach to Elvis's movie career by the mid-1960s. The lyrics of Dominic attempt to create sympathy for the bull character, positioning him as a peaceful creature who just wants to be free rather than fight in the arena. This anthropomorphizing of a bull into a peace-loving, conscientious objector creates an oddly political subtext for what was intended as just another movie song. Whether this unusual premise contributes to the song's low streaming numbers is debatable. But it certainly makes Dominic one of Elvis's more conceptually peculiar recordings. Musically, the track demonstrates more ambition than many of Elvis's movie soundtrack selections from this period. The Spanish guitar influences and dramatic orchestral swells give Dominic a cinematic quality appropriate to its narrative structure. Elvis's vocal performance shows genuine commitment to the material, with emotional delivery that honors the song's unusual story. Nevertheless, these qualities haven't been sufficient to elevate Dominic beyond cult curiosity status. In Elvis's vast catalog, as streaming audiences continue to overlook this ballad about a pacifist bull. Number 1. Patunia, the Gardener's Daughter. 1967. Have you heard the Elvis song that compares a woman to a garden flower? Patunia, the Gardener's Daughter, from the film Double Trouble, sits at the very bottom of Elvis's streaming statistics, making it potentially the least heard Elvis song in the digital age. This forgotten track features Elvis singing about falling in love with a gardener's daughter named Patunia, using plant-based metaphors and horticultural wordplay throughout its lyrics. Recorded at MGM Studios in Hollywood on June 29, 1966, the song was written by Bob Roberts and Ruth Batchelor specifically for the Double Trouble soundtrack. The film, which starred Elvis as a singer caught between two women while performing in Europe, used Patunia as a musical interlude rather than an integral plot element. The song's arrangement features a jaunty, upbeat tempo with light orchestration and backing vocals that typify the sound of Elvis's mid-1960s movie songs. In the film, Elvis performs the song on stage, but without any meaningful connection to the surrounding narrative. This disconnection between song and story was increasingly common in Elvis's movies of this period, as songs were often inserted to fulfill contractual obligations rather than enhance the storytelling. Patunia, the Gardener's Daughter, exemplifies this approach, feeling more like an obligation-fulfilling interlude than a meaningful musical moment. The lyrics of Patunia rely heavily on gardening puns and plant-related wordplay, with lines comparing the love interest to various flowers and describing romance in terms of growth and cultivation. While clearly aiming for light-hearted charm, the song's forced rhymes and labored metaphors make it feel more awkward than clever. Even Elvis's considerable vocal charisma struggles to breathe life into lines about planting a kiss on Petunia's lips, or how she grew in his heart. The production quality maintains professional standards, with clear recording and competent instrumental performances typical of Elvis's RCA sessions. However, the song's fundamental conceptual weaknesses and disconnection from Elvis's authentic musical identity have condemned it to the very bottom of his streaming statistics. As modern listeners curate their own Elvis experiences through digital platforms, Patunia, the gardener's daughter, has been left behind. A largely forgotten relic from a period when one of music's most influential voices was reduced to singing about gardeners and their flowery offspring. Did you ever wonder what gems might be hiding in Elvis's least played songs?